Welcome to the Irish Revolution. Last month, in February 1919, Éireann de Valera was spirited out of Lincoln jail along with two other Republicans in an operation spearheaded by Michael Collins and Harry Boland. When he returned to Ireland, he gave an interview to an American journalist outlining that violence was to be considered in Ireland as a last resort if Britain did not concede to Irish national ambitions. We also spoke a little bit about the intelligence war and Michael Collins' growing network of spies and informers. This month, March 1919, will see an operation by the Fingal North Dublin volunteers to raid for arms at Collinstown Aerodrome, the biggest of its kind throughout the entire War of Independence. We'll also briefly discuss efforts to procure arms and the shooting of John Charles Milling, the resident magistrate in Westport, County Mayo. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and remember to tap the bell for notifications. Also, please consider clicking on one of those links in the description. That'll help the channel out enormously. Cheers. So we're going to have a look at some biographies now. Do remember that last month we did biographies of Michael Collins, Harry Boland and Éireann de Valera. This month we're just going to do one on Richard Mulcahy. Richard Mulcahy fought in the 1916 Rising outside Dublin. He was second in command to Thomas Ashe in Ashbourne, County Meath. He was part of an effective force that took on an RIC patrol there and won. Imprisoned after the Rising, when he was released, he became the commandant of the Dublin Brigade of the Volunteers, and in March 1919, this month, he became the Chief of Staff of the Volunteers. Much less famous than Michael Collins, at least today, Mulcahy as Chief of Staff was instrumental to headquarters and to the IRA campaign. He would later serve as General of the Army and would have a distinguished post-war political career. Now on to the main story, Collinstown Aerodrome. Patrick McRae, a member of the Dublin Brigade and later of Michael Collins' squad, was involved in the raid on Collinstown Aerodrome. In his statement to the Bureau of Military History, he described how 25 men gathered in Parnell Square in Dublin City and then made their way to Collinstown Aerodrome, which, by the way, if you know your Dublin geography, is where Dublin City Airport is now. The men travelled in 5 cars and 3 cars will be waiting for the getaway. Some of the volunteers dressed in British uniforms in order to take the sentries by surprise. The volunteers got close to the sentries and held them up, and they were unable to call the alarm. The volunteers then stormed the guard room where 12 to 14 men were taken by surprise before they could reach their guns. The British soldiers were then tied up and reported by McRae not to have given any trouble except one who was tied up by the heels to the rafters. The men involved in the raid were given a dagger and a knuckle duster to be used in the operation. The idea was to get close to the soldiers, take them by surprise and take their weapons. The idea was not, at least at this stage of the war, to actually kill them, and there is no suggestion among the records of the raid that this was ever envisioned. The Fingal North Dublin volunteers managed to get 75 rifles and 4,000 rounds of ammunition, which was an enormous quantity of arms compared to what was then available to IRA units, and would be the biggest raid of its kind throughout the entire conflict. Ironically, despite being well armed, the Fingal IRA did very little with its hoard. It was considered a largely peaceful area in 1919 and well into 1920. Now I'm going to talk a bit now about getting weapons, the whole process of getting weapons, okay? So this raid on Collinstown Aerodrome raises a broader point, which I'm going to explore now for a while, the availability of arms. One of the best criticisms that could be levelled at Michael Collins is the lack of arms available for the rebels. This to me seems like a self-evident critique, but to be honest, I don't come across it very often. So do please say in the comments if you can refer me to some histories or contemporary documents where this kind of criticism gets mentioned. The IRA didn't have a lot of weapons. It was just after World War I. Europe was flooding with weapons. America was flooding with weapons. Collins should have been able to get his hands on more weapons. Not just Collins, the whole IRA structure. A lack of arms was the single greatest complaint of every IRA commander. It was a running sore throughout the campaign. Harry Boland, who we spoke about in the previous episode, would soon go to America, where one of his most important tasks would be to procure weapons. Small quantities of weapons would find their way to safe houses in Dublin, but Boland was looking for ways to get a big shipment over. American security services were keeping an eye on his activities, and the British were also keeping an eye on American ships in Irish ports, suggesting they knew at least some of the plans for the IRB to import weapons. There would be many spending much of the war working towards such a goal, yet it never quite worked out on a scale that one might have expected. Now, this is either an indication of British competence in stemming the flow of arms, or an indication of Irish incompetence in getting them into the country, take your pick. From the outset of the War of Independence, there were arms available in different quantities and different quality across the country. In the Dublin region, they still had some arms left over from the Howth gun running in July 1914. Some weapons would have been hand-me-downs from the old National Volunteers. During the war itself, weapons were either stolen from or amazingly bought from occasionally drunken British soldiers. It's hard to imagine this, but soldiers did sometimes lose, inverted commas, their weapons, and there seemed to be not much punishment for it. There were periodic raids up and down the country, and in rural areas shotguns were often taken from farmers and country people. The IRA were slow to realise the great potential of the humble shotgun for the type of guerrilla warfare they would end up fighting. There was also a grenade factory in Dublin, set up in 1917 by Patrick McHugh and Michael Lynch in the basement of a bicycle shop in Parnell Street. In the early days, 100 grenades were being produced every week. Over time, the staff got more sophisticated and attempts were made to create experimental field mortars, which would end in disaster for all involved, by the way. On the 10th of December 1920, the British would capture the grenade factory, but the staff would escape and set up elsewhere. There was often talk of big arms shipments that would come from America, and there were plans afoot for a large shipment from Italy too. It just never seemed to work out for whatever reason, at least not at a big scale. Either the conspirators were too incompetent or the British security was too tight. Near the end of the war, it looked like Harry Boland would finally succeed with a huge shipment of Thompson machine guns from America, which might have been transformational. According to Hopkinson, they were easy to store and well suited to urban warfare. They were also state-of-the-art weapons. The Southland were purchased in America after very lengthy negotiations. Only a few ever actually arrived, and were only ever used in one operation. 2 US veterans, Major James Dineen and Captain Patrick Cronin, were sent over to Ireland to instruct the IRA on how to use them. Perhaps this inspired the Irish storyline in Boardwalk Empire, I'm not sure about that actually. In the end, most of the weapons were seized by American customs in New Jersey. Republican dreams of a huge influx of weapons that they hoped would transform the war were dashed once again. Okay, and in the final section today, a few miscellaneous things. So, first of all, let me reflect on a killing in Westport in County Mayo at the end of the month. John Charles Milling, a resident magistrate. It's not clear who ordered the shooting, but the historian Michael Hopkinson suggests that it was ordered by Young Turks, his words, in the IRB, the Irish Republican Brotherhood by the way, and was intended to pressurise volunteer officers to take some action in Mayo to stimulate activity there. Despite this, Mayo would take little part in the IRA campaign to come, being one of the quieter places in Ireland during the War of Independence, and was significantly behind most places in Munster in terms of organisation. These kinds of attacks on British civil personnel in Ireland, while relatively few, were usually demoralising for the organs of the British state in Ireland. The Dáil Courts would soon begin to appear all over Ireland, supplanting the British legal infrastructure. I did an episode about that, by the way, which you should be able to see now. And a final note, remember how I said last month that the historian David Fitzpatrick said that De Valera was worried that he would have been released before his escape from Lincoln Jail? Well, this month a large number of prominent Republicans were released, including Sean McEntee and J.J. O'Connell among others. They were the remnant of the so-called German plot in 1918. Many of these men were seen as moderates, and apparently this influenced the British cabinet, thinking that their return to Irish politics would somehow moderate things there. De Valera, having escaped the months before, was now able to come out of hiding, and although a welcome home demonstration was scheduled for March 26, in the end it never happened. And that's it for today. We had an audacious raid for arms, some prisoner releases, and the shooting of a resident magistrate in Mayo, threatening British administration on the island. See you again soon, and thanks for watching. Do let people know about the channel if you don't mind. Spread the word. Thanks now. Good luck.